My. It seems like everybody wants a piece of this young man. And I'm not talking about Liam Lawson, who has practically become public enemy number one in the Spanish-speaking world. So maybe Brazil might be a little bit more forgiving, and they might not even care, because there might be an opportunity for Felipe Drugovich to get the call-up. But wait, Felipe is Aston Martin's reserve driver, Law. I know. Because there are reports that Fernando Alonso's illness that saw him not arrive at the track in Mexico last week until Friday afternoon has not shifted enough to be of no concern. Alonso won't be around since he flew back to Europe in between Grand Prix to receive treatment from specialist doctors for some kind of intestinal infection. Now, before you get really concerned and the delay is down to the fact that he's still in a hospital bed, then don't worry. It's simply down to logistical issues, which has meant that his treatment has caused him to just arrive at the track a little bit late. So he may or may not be racing on Friday, and if that's the case, considering it's a sprint weekend, that would be a major cause for concern. But this being Fernando Alonso, I don't think he would really even care because of what Aston Martin are doing right now. They're not even troubling the bottom bit of the top 10 at the moment. But honestly, I'm glad that he's not rushing treatment, and this is the sort of thing you get in back-to-back sessions, and you want to be at your absolute best if you're going around a circuit at 200 miles an hour. Or else you might find yourself in a situation where you are still going 200 miles an hour, but instead of getting to the front of the grid, it's getting to the nearest toilet. But supposing Drugovich does get an opportunity, I'm pretty sure that Brazilian fans of F1 will be very conflicted. Sure, it'd be a shame if Alonso missed out on some racing action, he's an absolute F1 legend, but it would mean that Felipe Drugovich will get to race around his home track. Again, it's really unfortunate for Alonso to be dealing with this, and I really hope that he's fully recovered this time around, but he didn't really get much of a time to properly recover because there'd be all the air travel, especially getting back to Europe from Mexico and then going down to Brazil. But what isn't so worrisome is the future potentially of one Franco Colapinto. Yes, you might be getting a little bit bored of the constant chatter around this driver, but the chatter about him simply won't stop, because this is basically the closest to a home race that the Argentine driver will get in Formula 1 at the moment. Although having said that, Formula 1 is really looking into the idea of returning to Argentina maybe in the next few years, so we might get to see a race in Buenos Aires again, or maybe another part of the country. Who knows? Because it has been quite evident over the last 15-20 years that if a driver becomes really popular, F1 just likes to put a pin on the world map and go, we need a track there! And it's understandable because F1 in Argentina and South America, the popularity there has absolutely surged. And there is a lot to consider which could possibly even eclipse the news. Not only will Sebastian Vettel be knocking around the paddock this weekend, but also Lewis Hamilton will be seen in a McLaren for the first time in perhaps over a decade, with him driving an MP45 around the Interlagos circuit from one of Senna's championship years. I mean, it would make sense, since technically this is Lewis Hamilton's second home race, since he is an honorary Brazilian citizen. However, there will be many eyes and cheers for the likes of Franco Colapinto, because even though he's Argentinian, the Brazilian fans will support him, at least until Gabriel Bortoleto gets his chance in Formula 1, which is expected to be tipped at Sauber, even though the likelihood might be on the wane, but you never know. If he wins the F2 championship, it would be an absolute no-brainer. But Franco can expect the crowds to be theatrically cheering him to infinity, and theatrically booing his teammate, as well as anyone that would dare cross him. That, of course, being Liam Lawson after what fans saw them do together in Mexico. Now, I know that you might be thinking I'm being really unfair toward Liam Lawson, but I will give him credit in the fact that he is an absolute hustler. He is wasting no time in making an impression and causing headlines to be generated about F1. And F1, it certainly likes them headlines so long as it's got nothing to do with curse words or anything like that. But then having said that, it involved a rude gesture, so it's a little bit of give and take there. But at least Lawson's not boring, so that's something, I suppose. But as a result of all of this hubbub, it might actually impede Liam Lawson's rise to the top as being potentially a replacement for Sergio Perez in the next year or two. The hubbub is growing ever stronger about the news that Christian Horner might be looking at the Argentine driver not only for VCARB, but maybe for the Red Bull Racing ticket, perhaps jumping Lawson in the queue to partner Max Verstappen. What? Now, before I continue, I must really grab the foam of doubt here, because Franco Colapinto has openly said that there are no plans for him being in F1 next year, that he is going to be on the sidelines or racing in another category, probably going back to F2 for 2025 to just remain on the radar and on the periphery and around Grand Prix weekends, because he will then also be the reserve driver, and like I've mentioned before in previous videos, he will be subjected to the F1 TV director, and every time Carlos or Alex makes a mistake in a Williams, they'll cut to Franco expectantly. that's what his role will be next year, like Lawson's was this year when Ricciardo or Tsunoda would make a mistake. More often than not, it would be Ricciardo. But there are some practical reasons as to why Christian would want to look into Franco's opportunities for the future. First off, Christian did say that he wouldn't be a good team principal if he at least didn't try to explore any ideas regarding Franco being in the Red Bull fold. But also, it might solve quite a few problems that are arising concerning the continued tenure with Checo. Because it's evident that Argentina and the country's companies are excited at the prospect of the driver making waves around the world, and eyes will be on their businesses at a time where the country's economy is incredibly shaky. Globant, one of Franco's sponsors, is expanding its work with F1 itself, sponsoring other Grand Prix, as well as sponsoring Williams and Colapinto himself. And if more sponsors come on board to wherever the driver goes, it could solve the problem Christian has in regards to plugging the gap left by Perez's sponsors cutting ties with the team. As we recall, Telmex is looking at probably cutting the ties it has with Red Bull, but remaining sponsors with Checo specifically. So this could be a win-win-win-win situation for Red Bull Racing. It would give them plenty of sponsorship money still. It would give them an absolute popular driver amongst all demographics. It will give them a young driver to lead the team into the future, as well as the fact that, according to Horner, he vastly exceeded expectations. Nobody expected him to be this good, given his F2 results, which were perfectly solid and reasonable, but in F1, he just seems to have clicked. And that happens sometimes. You sometimes get okay F2 drivers, and they turn out to be pretty impressive in an F1 car. I mean, I can give you an example in Kimi Raikkonen. He barely raced in single-seaters. He was on probation with the FIA when he got into F1 with Sauber, and then look what the Finn went on to do. He almost bankrupted a team about how good he was in 2013. And according to rumours, Williams might end up being paid off handsomely too if Red Bull chooses to extract Franco from Vals's bosom. All at the expense of Liam Lawson, perhaps, whose backing isn't quite as potent, and his reach might not be quite as big as the Argentinians. Now, again, this is all pure speculation, but there are logical reasons as to why this might go forward, and maybe everyone and all the parties, including Colapinto, are just playing it down and just seeing where everything lies at the end of the season, because sure, Franco has had a really good run so far, but it might peter out a little bit, or Alex Albon might respond, because in qualifying he was faster than the Argentine, but as we know in the race, down to bad luck, Albon really didn't get an opportunity to capitalise on his Q3 appearance, and Colapinto was able to shine yet again. I think Colapinto is right in just managing his expectations and thinking about his own plan, instead of just buying into the hype that has been manifested with his arrival. He's having a great time, and he's getting to see some success and gain some fans. Fantastic. I am so happy for him. And he has the chops and results to justify it, because a Williams, that many points, boom. And he said, keep an eye on 2026 and 2027. That's when he says he'll strike. Because maybe he might want to see where all the teams end up in the new rules and regulations set. And at the moment, the prospects for Red Bull aren't looking all that rosy for this weekend. Even though Max Verstappen has moments where he can outdrive the car for more than what his teammate is capable of doing at the moment, the fact of the matter is that the team has effectively given up on the team championship, which is a big admission for them, as well as still coming to terms with the fact that when it comes to their recent upgrades from Austin, compared to all of the other teams, they had quite a lot less data in which to go off of, which was not helped on Friday in FP2 in Mexico. Max basically sat all of it out, and any time he did get out, he didn't get any long, meaningful runs, and that was in moments of the weekend where you can casually tweak the setup and get it just right, instead of just having to make do for the race and make the most and see where the chips lie, except for changing the diff and your front wing or tyre pressures or something. Not only that, but there will be the matter of a grid drop looming over the team's head for the race on Sunday. The sprint race might give Verstappen some comfort, given that he's won pretty much every single sprint race ever run, but that would be looking likely to limit the damage on Sunday that could be blown to his advantage over Lando Norris, whose McLaren will probably be right up at the head of the pack, whereas Red Bull's prospects look less clear-cut. Now, granted, the resurfaced track might give the RB20 a little bit more relief, because, as it's become quite clear, it's extremely bump-averse, so having a smooth track might make things a little better for Max, and a lot more forgiving. Given the track areas of Austin where they were resurfaced, the Red Bull car did flourish in those particular corners, but it wasn't the entire track, so we'll just have to wait and see whether or not this new Interlagos surface will play ball with the Red Bull. But then Helmut Marko came out with a bombshell, which has been somewhat confirmed by all the data gatherers out there, is that this iteration of the RB20 does not like slow-speed corners, and that could be a major issue, considering that Sector 2 of Interlagos is made up of pretty much all slow speed corners. So any driver that's coming up right behind them could get a really good run into the DRS backed straight and get a really good toe before then unleashing it down the second DRS straight and really finishing off the move in turn 4. So I think it's going to be absolutely vital for Max Verstappen to get a setup which is built around qualifying, so that means he can get as far up the grid as possible, maybe try and make a couple of places up at the beginning, and then scamper off into the distance, so that means he could dictate the race, or at least try and fend off the likes of Leclerc and Norris as much as possible, because there's also those two. They are fighting amongst themselves as to who's going to go after Max, of course, as what Lando and George were doing, and many other people earlier in the year when Red Bull did have the advantage, Canada being the most obvious example. But having said that though, taking the penalty, if it does come around here, is a lot better than doing it during the triple header, the last one, Vegas, Qatar, Abu Dhabi, because having it here, they can bed it in, they've got another engine to the pool, and also you can overtake in Interlagos. It's pretty easy to do, relatively speaking, amongst all of the other circuits. And also Marco did say that Qatar might be really good for them, so having a relatively fresh engine for that race, that could pay dividends. As for the rest of the pack, Mercedes look likely to not be making an impact amongst the top 3 teams, with Toto Wolff admitting that they are bracing themselves for a very forgettable weekend, with them basically turning the next few races into extended test sessions in time for next year. Supposedly, they're doing quite a few things that we might not be privy to, maybe running some experimental parts for the W16 under the hood, which means they don't actually have to proclaim it to the world in the show and tell session on Friday. And then also there's the matter of what they were doing in Mexico by running both drivers on different specs of the machine. George was running in Mexico the Silverstone spec, which was quite competitive, and then of course Lewis was riding with the main latest spec that was brought from Mexico specifically. And it was really quite close actually, and Russell was impeded somewhat with some wing damage, I recall. But then also Lewis did get past him in the end, so could it be a matter of what Lewis had in terms of the car over the course of a race distance? Or is it just down to the fact that Lewis is really good when you get to the end of the race and he can actually get past? It was a really good battle all the same. But I think for this weekend, they are saying that they are switching it around, that Lewis will be running an older spec, which proved quite effective and reliable, and then George will be running a more recent spec. But one thing has become absolutely clear, is that the cost cap, according to Toto, has really impeded Mercedes' understanding of what they can do into improving the car. Although earlier in the year they did say that they had gotten on top of the cost cap situation in terms of what parts to bring and what to prioritise, it's clear that they've suddenly gone backwards again because of the fact that over the last couple of races, either the car has spun off, so that means they can't get any meaningful data in the race, Lewis and Austin, or in the case of 2 sessions in a row from George, the car has been damaged in a crash, which means that time and resources and money has been ploughed into getting that car repaired for the following session, so that means it could even do anything meaningful. So what Toto had said, that they need some clean laps in which to understand what they need to do for next year, so that means they can get a good baseline. And quite honestly, I think that's probably the best thing to do, and it might mean that they're not troubling the top 5. They might be lucky to get 6th at best, and I wouldn't be surprised if Magnussen or Hülkenberg over at Haas gives them a little bit of trouble this weekend at some point, maybe especially in the sprint. You cannot discount them at Brazil. This seems to be one of their stronger tracks, and we all remember the heroics that we saw in 2022. Sure, the weather did play a part in it, and timing was absolutely crucial for Kevin Magnussen to get Haas's only pole position in F1 ever. But as many people have pointed out with their Toyota backing, the gritty Haas might actually prove to be quite potent around this track, given the fact that their trend has only exceeded expectations and continues to improve. And the Toyota partnership, it might continue to bed itself in terms of the track experience and knowledge, or it's simply down to the fact that the team is actually being run competently, and the updates they are bringing, how they understand the VF24, it actually works. And Magnussen seems emboldened, fired up, maybe for the fact that he doesn't have to worry about next year. He can go out on a high. Hülkenberg, he's making the most of the fact that this will probably be the last time he scores meaningful points for a while, unless Audi kick on for 2026 or at the end of next year. So both drivers are looking to make a point, and they're going to have some fun. Maybe them contesting 6th place, and again, giving Mercedes a lot of pain and limiting what they can do. And we all got to remember last year, Mercedes had a really forgettable weekend. That was a major disappointment for them. And even though there's about a 40-point gap between Haas and Aston Martin, I want Haas to get within maybe 20, 15 points of them. I want Aston Martin to sweat because of all of the money they've ploughed into their operation. There comes the Placky Haas, Everyone likes an underdog. That's another narrative to see. Yeah, I don't think they'll get 5th place, but I want them to get close and actually show they can be somewhat competitive. 50 points this year for Haas? Oh, easy. They're only 4 points away from doing that. They only need 8th place or 7th to achieve that. And if Fernando Alonso does get on the track this weekend, expect if he is then completely swamped by the Haasses to utter out another radio gem. But since things are getting hairy at the front, let's go back to my predictions for the top 5 this weekend. Now, based on last year, and given the fact that the MCL60 for the first time in a long while made McLaren the fastest car out of everybody, I'm not saying the fastest combination since that was Max in the RB19, no question, I would say that Lando Norris stands a fairly good chance of winning the Brazilian Grand Prix. He seemed completely on song, and this seems like a track which is really built for the characteristics that Lando seems to love. This is almost like a counterclockwise Spielberg in a way. So the twisty slow corners might really appeal to the likes of the MCL38. They'll set it up specifically, and Lando did seem to really gel well with the circuit when he did have the machine that could be competitive. And also, he was within 8 seconds of Max Verstappen at the front. Now, of course, safety cars might come into play to make sure the gaps don't get astronomically big. And I also think that Ferrari will be playing a major role in keeping things quite spicy and Lando honest. I'm not expecting him to run off into the distance and get 15, 20, 25 seconds ahead of the competition. Nah, that ain't gonna happen. Ferrari seem to really come on song to allow them to do that. But I do think that Lando stands a good chance of pretty much doing one better than he did last year, which was certainly exceeding expectations and really capping off a really solid season for McLaren, which started off so poorly. And hopefully, by the time we get to the Grand Prix, the upgrades that McLaren have brought will have been dialed in a little bit more, since, much like with Red Bull or anybody that decided to bring upgrades to a sprint weekend, there'll have been time to understand it fully, get to know it, and see what it can do over the course of a circuit, which overtaking is quite doable on, which might see Max Verstappen figure by the end of the race perhaps, if he can actually get the setup just right, and the engine penalty isn't too bad, or they just have to replace certain parts. But I certainly think that Lando is the favourite to do it, but again, I don't think he's going to be completely cakewalking everybody. I just think that he and McLaren will just have that little bit more over the likes of Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz and the Ferrari. And speaking of the Ferraris and Charles Leclerc, I'm going to be putting him in 2nd place. It's quite evident that the Ferrari at the moment is quite the versatile machine. It scored the most points out of any of the major teams. I think close to 100 points over 2 race weekends, and of course Austin was a sprint, but that is a clear show of dominance, and now they've gone from being a somewhat distant third from Red Bull to now eclipsing Red Bull, and now being within 20-ish points of McLaren for the lead, and both drivers have won a Grand Prix, so that's incredibly good for their momentum. And I think Charles Leclerc will be keen to make a point after what happened last year, where he didn't even make the race. He crashed out on the formation lap when the car gave out on him, and that resulted in him having to make a pilgrimage to one of the holiest sites in Catholicism. The championship for the driver's sake might not be on the cards at the moment, although it might be a nice little challenge maybe, a bonus side quest. But the constructors is very much in the offing for Ferrari at the moment, and both drivers seem to be really gelling well with the car. And Carlos Sainz, I think, will be right behind Charles in 3rd place. Like I said with Charles, it seems to be a car which is gelling well with them both, even though many people thought, including myself, that the car would be moving away from what Carlos Sainz likes and more towards what might be good as a baseline for Lewis Hamilton when he comes in to replace him. But all of the rhetoric that Carlos has had and what he wanted to do with Ferrari has been somewhat poetic, and it's resulted in a duo which has proven to be even more competent and fruitful than McLaren were in the middle of the season. They seem to be getting things right, Ferrari, and the strategies are strategizing, or at least they have been able to pull off some major flukes, and they've gotten their upgrade package down pat. It's all coming well for the Scuderia at a time when they need it most. If they can get the Constructors' title this year, I think that will be an extremely popular victory, and something that has been a long time coming, and a little bit of nice silverware for Maranello to really make the most of over the winter, and really buoy them for next year when they could really go for the double. And also, track-specific-wise, Carlos is pretty good around this track because we got to remember what he was able to do, a burn from the stern operation with McLaren to get them third place, their first trophy in about 5 years. So he does know his way around this track. I will not be surprised if we see him right behind Leclerc. And Leclerc was somewhat limited in what he could do in Mexico in getting close to Carlos because Carlos got a little bit shirty over the radio, and Leclerc was nursing a supposed issue which turned out to be a non-issue, so they were telling him to slow down for seemingly no concerning reason. Hopefully that won't come up again this race, and we might see these two actually racing each other so long as they don't take any risks, like they sort of did in Monza. They have actually come to blows, or at least come really close to taking each other off this year, I think most notably Spain or something like that, but I think they'll keep it clean, but I think they'll certainly be on for getting yet another double podium. Albeit maybe not the top spot, but second and third. I think Ferrari will be really happy with the results of this particular triple header, considering the last triple header was absolutely atrocious. Then in fourth place, I've got Max Verstappen. Now, I think that this is going to be a bit of a generous one if he gets a full 10-place grid penalty, or maybe something that's completely comprehensive, which sees him maybe starting from the pit lane. Although having said that, at a track where you can overtake, that might not be such a bad feat, because as we saw with Lewis Hamilton a few years ago, you can start from near the back and go on to win the whole widget. So, doing it here, it's a relatively forgiving circuit at a track which Verstappen has actually shown some historic appearances, most notably in 2016 and 2019, where he completely controlled the field, or at least made a really good resounding appearance. I will not forget that rainy day in 2016, but having said that though, the Red Bull car seems to be a little bit of a mixed bag. The resurfaced track might help the RB20 somewhat, but given that they are really lacking in terms of long race runs with this new spec of car, and also they might be nursing other issues as well, I don't see Max getting anything higher than fourth if the penalties and the grid drops apply. If they don't, and they can actually string it out for one more race, or they don't need to, they found a way to fix the situation without having to replace the whole widget, then maybe he might be on for a podium. But also, he might also be fourth anyway, albeit maybe not 15-20 seconds down the road from the two Ferraris and the McLaren. It might be a little bit closer than that. They might be able to rely on an undercut to get them on the podium, but I don't really see Max Verstappen winning it wholesale or dominantly, unless there's a huge crash at the start involving Norris or Leclerc or Sainz, and Max can make the most of it, or he sets up the car specifically in a way that is great for qualifying, but might be lacking in the race, and just going an all-out, all guns blazing, get as far as you can, maybe even do a 2 or 3 stop strategy, going off the grain, an alternate strategy. He's got to try everything in his arsenal, because quite clearly, this car at the moment is not giving him what he needs to be able to drive smoothly to the front. He has to hustle that car, as we saw in Mexico. His main goal at the moment going into the last triple header is to minimise the amount of points that Lando and Charles are able to get off of him, because not counting the sprint, if we get a situation where Lando wins the race and Max is fourth, the trend continues, this will go all the way to Abu Dhabi, and that's not counting the sprint races. If Lando can get the jump on him there as well, then we could be down to under 30 points, and maybe if one of them has a DNF or Max DNFs here, the replacement doesn't work, then it's game on. So in terms of competition and excitement, great. But for Max, this is going to be a damage limitation weekend, I reckon. Then in fifth place, I've got Oscar Piastri, and I think this might be a pretty distant fifth place. And you might be thinking I'm harsh toward my boy. I'm trying to channel all the good energy I can, because I'm even wearing his hoodie right now, and I will certainly be looking at getting his Christmas jumper with his face on it for just laughs, but either way. Given the last couple of races in the Americas have really not been fortuitous, and all of those Q1 exits, I'm like, oh, it's quite clear that at the moment, and we've got to preface this, Oscar's not been running the full upgraded McLaren, that he's really been struggling in the last couple of races. I really didn't expect miracles at Mexico or Austin. I didn't expect him to be crashing out in Q1 on both weekends in some capacity, albeit Austin being the sprint qualifies. But I think that maybe we might not be seeing Oscar on the podium for this race at the very least. We don't really have much to go on from last year, considering that he was one of the people affected at the start of last year's race, and then due to some kind of miscalculation with lap times and lap counts, he and Ricciardo were consigned to being 1 lap down, even though they went in to come on repairs, which they could actually do with a red flag, and they were just caught in the absolute mix-up. So I really don't have much to go off of, and in qualifying, he was only just about able to get into Q3. He hopefully will have been able to regroup over the simple mistakes that he himself has admitted that he has done, but I can't really give him anything more than fifth, and that will be pretty much last of the major front runners, considering that Checo at the moment, I don't know what he's doing. I mean, I'm expecting maybe like 7th again, like he has been doing recently. I might be harsh towards somebody who I'm really a big fan of, but you've also got to take the rough with the smooth if you're a fan of somebody. There are going to be moments where they don't perform, and that's okay. You just support the person because you like them, not because they're successful. Trust me, I did my time with McLaren during the dark days, and now we've got the good days. I'll take both the rough with the smooth on that occasion. But yeah, I don't expect Oscar to be troubling the podium this weekend. But another challenge which seems to be knocking around is that of Max Verstappen with the British media and its biases, which echoes somewhat that of what a younger Michael Schumacher had when he was making his mark on the sport before Ferrari came in all guns blazing and he was able to work his magic with the Italian team. I can confidently say now that Max Verstappen, he's not a Senna-type driver, he's a Schumacher-type driver. Both incredibly fast, with a huge legacy for the sport. And that is something I talk about in this video here that you can go watch right now. I'll see you there, but hear me out.